Welcome to Farm Connections. I'm your host, Dan Hoffman. Today we visit with Alan Doering from the Agriculture Utilization Research Institute to learn more about how this lab helps add value to ag products. We hear from Kent Tesey about the high demand for the CRP program, and Dr. Lowell Catlett shares his thoughts about the future of agriculture. This week's special guest is Lynn Kettleson with a look at the craft brewery industry. Stay with us. Farm Connections is next.
Welcome to Farm Connections with your host, Dan Hoffman.
Alcorn Clean Fuel, a farmer-owned cooperative in Claremont, Minnesota, produces ethanol, high-protein livestock feed, and corn oil, and beverage-grade carbon dioxide for resale to benefit its members and their communities. Absolute Energy, a locally owned facility, produces 115 million gallons of ethanol annually, proudly supporting local economies in Iowa and Minnesota. Absolute Energy, adding value to the neighborhood.
The mission of AURI, or Agriculture Utilization Research Institute, is to foster long-term economic benefit for Minnesota through value-added agricultural products. One of the key team members of this organization is Senior Associate Scientist Al Doering. Welcome to Farm Connections, Al.
Thank you, Dan, for having us.
Oh, we're glad to have you. Again, you're always an appealing guy to have.
Thank you.
So what's happening at your lab?
Well, Dan, one of the things that we focus on at AURI, especially in Waseca, is on co-products. And that's where I manage the co-product pilot lab down there. And really the mission for that lab is to add value to a co-product. And a lot of times people wonder, what is a co-product? And the best example that I can give, it's a byproduct that stems from an original product. So in the case of ethanol, you know, the main product is you produce ethanol, but the co-product is distillers, which is a high protein, high energy feed product, and that's a perfect example of a co-product.
Part of your mission is to enhance Minnesota businesses and Minnesota ag products, correct?
Correct. So the way we're doing that is AURI has a variety of ways that we handle projects. One of them is we can have individual projects with clients or with commodity groups. Basically, it's more so with clients where their information is held proprietary. If they have an idea for a product or need help with a process, they can come to us. We'll help them with all those steps. If it is a commodity group or say a business, what AURI will do is develop an initiative. And usually that's research that we do on their behalf for the commodity group, but that information is for the general public. And that's a good way to assist both groups.
Well, you've got a lab in Waseca as shown on the camera.
Yep.
Where else are you based?
AURI, well, obviously we're in Waseca, and that's where the co-product focus is. Our main office is up in Crookston. We have a microbiologist up there that does a lot of the microbiology work and the bio-based work. Mm-hmm. In Marshall, we have a meats lab, a USDA inspected meats lab, and then we also do a lot of stuff with the analytical chemistry, working with oils such as biodiesel and so forth. Then we also have offices up in St. Paul, and I'm missing one, in Crookston. I guess I repeated that. That is the main offices.
So Crookston, Marshall, Waseca, and St. Paul?
Correct.
Nice. What kind of equipment do you use in your lab?
So in our pilot lab, you know, people ask me that question all the time. We have a variety of equipment. One that gets a lot of attention and keeps us busy is a pellet mill. A lot of people will turn to AURI if they want to develop a pellet. It's usually not as easy as just putting the material in and out comes a pellet. You know, we'll help them identify how much steam is required, the economics of producing that pellet, how many kilowatt hours it requires per ton of feed. We'll help identify what size die they need to make a pellet, and then compression ratio of the die and so forth. So a good example of that is one that I had shared with you a little bit off the camera. Just recently, actually yesterday, we've got an initiative working with the Minnesota hops growers. So as they produce hops, one of the key things that the microbrewers are looking for is a pelleted version for their brewing instead of using the hops in the loose leaf form. The reason they came to us is because when they produce a pellet out of hops, it's very heat sensitive to protect the oils that are in the hops. So that pellet has to be produced at less than 110 degrees Fahrenheit. And then there's also a specific density that the pellet needs to achieve, because you want a pellet that'll stay together, but yet once they're brewing the beer, it actually needs to dissolve and fall apart. So it gets a little tricky, and that's where AURI was providing services to them. Another example is a few of the feed processors or even alfalfa pelleters in the state, if they want to develop a new product, they'd rather have us do it with our lab dye to tell them what's the correct dye to use, rather than going out and spending $16,000 for a dye and then finding out it doesn't work. So it's very enjoyable being able to help these companies.
Well, necessity brings a mother of invention, right? Or is a mother of invention. And you guys were formed during some times when commodities were very low. What's been the result of your work, Al, your research, and what's happened to those products as they move to the field or the people you've worked with?
Yep. And Dan, there are so many great examples that we could share. You know, a few of the biggest ones, and I brought a sample of that too. It's with pet care systems. You know, and next time, you know, I'll just set the box over here. It's a big box, but next time you're in Target or Petco, PetSmart, look at the cat litter aisle. What you will find is Sweet Scoop, and it's spelt with wheat in its name. That was one of the original projects that we started on, and it has continued to migrate. They went from using wheat that could not be used in the human food chain as a cat litter because it's all natural, it's biodegradable, it clumps amazing if you get the formulation right, and plus it's septic system safe. So that was really the key selling points when that started. Well, that company continued to grow in Detroit Lakes. They outgrew their wheat supply because they were pulling a very specific wheat supply, trying to leave the wheat side alone that goes for human food. So then we also looked at what kind of co-products can we add to that litter, still get the same or improved performance, and they've went through a couple very large expansions. So that's a big success story.
Huge, and think of all the jobs that are involved in that factory and transportation, and using a product that's agriculture based.
And
How about, excuse me, go ahead.
There was one other project that I just wanted to throw out real quick, especially being in this community with a lot of farmers around. One of the original projects that AURI helped a company to develop was Preference. And for any of the farmers out there listening that are doing their own spraying and are dealing with chemical, Preference has been used for years. And that was actually originally a result of AURI and some of our chemists. And that product uses a co-product from soybeans.
Is it a surfactant?
Correct.
So what benefit is that to the people that use it?
So I was talking to an individual from the company that actually retails it right now, and they said it is probably one of the highest sold volume products out there. You know, right away you think of the Roundups and some of these other chemicals. Preference has been around for years, and the benefit to it is it acts as a water conditioner, a surfactant, so it helps the chemical dissipate better, and you get better spraying results.
Covering over the plant surface.
Correct.
And that was developed by your labs.
That came out of AURI.
What have you got here?
So one of the new things that we're focusing on, and this will involve the co-product pilot lab, is we're starting to see shrimp growers appear in Minnesota. What's unique about the shrimp growers is it doesn't take a lot of room. The heated tanks that are required can very easily be managed in Minnesota. So this was an exciting thing to see. But one of their biggest struggles is the feed that they require. It's very expensive, $4 a pound or greater. And a lot of the commodities used within that feed are not coming from Minnesota. So what we're doing is we're working with a couple of the shrimp growers, and we're also working with a feed processor that's capable of producing a very small pellet, which you can see there.
It's a great product, and this is an example of kind of a new field of adventure for you, Minnesota, and agriculture, right?
It is, all of them, because what we're trying to do is one of the major ingredients is fish meal, and that's why the expense is so high as we see fish meal becoming limited. We want to start using Minnesota commodities, looking at low oligosaccharide soybean meal, which is very high in protein, which will be excellent for a shrimp feed, and also look at including distillers or corn gluten into the same product to get the same results.
Al, this is fantastic, and I like that you're looking forward. You're already filling a pipeline. We didn't even get into building materials, and we're really going to have to ask you back again sometime.
Sounds good. Well, thank you, Dan, for having us.
Can you give us a little contact information in case somebody in our audience wants to talk to you about developing a product?
Yep, and that's one thing I want to share with everybody. Everybody asks, how do they get a hold of us, or what are the charges? If you're a Minnesota producer, if you're using a Minnesota ag commodity, our services are at no charge. And boy, the easiest way to get a hold of us is look us up on the web at AURI.org. Don't do the .com, but the .org. And they should find all the information to start.
Fantastic, Al.
Thank you, Dan.
Stay with us. Cantisi talks about the robust enrollment for CRP.
Thanks, Dan. The USDA Farm Service Agency recently announced that more than 800,000 acres were accepted into the Conservation Reserve or CRP program during the recent 49th CRP sign-up period. This was one of the most competitive CRP enrollment periods ever, with over 3 million acres being offered for CRP enrollment. There was likely much more interest in CRP enrollment in 2016 due to the lower crop prices and reduced farm profitability in the last couple of years. 26,000 offers to enroll 1.8 million CRP acres were offered for the general CRP program. Only 411,000, or 23% of those acres, were actually accepted under general CRP. There was an additional 364,000 acres accepted in 2016 in the continuous CRP program. This is a non-competitive program that targets the most environmentally sensitive land, such as buffer strips along rivers, streams, and lakes, and that type of thing. As of March 1st of this year, there was a total of 23.7 million acres enrolled in the CRP program, which is down from 27 million acres back in 2013, 31 million acres in 2009, and 36.8 million acres as recently as 2007. The general CRP program had 17 million acres on March 1st, 5 million acres in continuous CRP, and 1.1 million acres in what's called the CRP program, which is a cooperation of CRP and state initiatives in states such as Minnesota that many times focuses on water quality issues. The maximum number of CRP acres that can be enrolled in the current Farm Bill is in the 2014 Farm Bill is 24 million acres. This has been reduced in each of the last two Farm Bills and continues to put pressure on. All of the general CRP bids are evaluated based on the Environmental Benefits Index, which focuses on soil erosion, water and air quality, and benefits to wildlife. Another general CRP program could be possible in 2017. USDA is currently celebrating the 30th anniversary of the CRP program and 3 decades of conservation success. The CRP program was originally developed as part of the 1985 Farm Bill and was established by USDA in December of that year. CRP has been the largest and most important conservation program in the U.S. since 1985. CRP continues to make major contributions toward national efforts to improve water and air quality, to prevent soil erosion, and to protect environmentally sensitive land, as well as to enhance wildlife populations. This is Kent Tesey, and we'll be back next time.
I'm Dan Hoffman at the Ag Symposium at the South Central College in Mankato, Minnesota. And with me today is the esteemed futurist in agriculture, Dr. Lowell Catlett.
That's right, thanks.
Well, welcome to Farm Connections, Lowell.
My pleasure, honored to be here.
Wonderful audience in there, and it looks like you really got them to think. Any takeaways from today?
Well, I just wanted them to understand I think it's the best time ever to be in agriculture, simply because we've never had a period where we had so much money that's floating around the world, and they want better diets, they want more meat protein in their diets, and they want weird stuff like craft brew. So, you know, it's the best time ever to be involved with it because there's so many venues for people to be involved with it.
Well, thank you. You mentioned the greatest flow of international funds to the United States than ever. What difference does it make, and what impact will it have?
Well, for one, we think if we're going to meet the demand of both China, Brazil, and India, the growing nations with money that want more meat protein in their diet, we have to double meat output in the next 20 years. And most of that doubling of the meat output will come from the United States because we know how to do it, and we have the comparative advantage to produce in those facilities, either hogs or in cattle or in chickens, the ability to take that corn and soybeans and turn them into meat protein, which is what the world's willing to pay for.
Awesome. You've also talked a little bit about trends and the population in the United States compared to production. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, the population in the United States is actually, we're not even reproducing ourselves. The world's population has slowed, but the biggest trend for us that I found interesting was just a few years ago, 1970, it's not a few, it's 46 years now, but we could not produce enough calories in the world for the 3.6 billion people. Now we can produce, instead of 2,450, we produce 2,900 calories. Some say 3,100 calories. It doesn't matter. We got enough food produced in the world right now to add at least another 1.5 billion people, and they can have normal body weight and maintenance. It's a distribution problem for some places, but agriculture has produced the most calories ever in history, and we got enough to feed the world.
And that might mean something different to somebody who's overweight or obese compared to somebody that's well undernourished, correct?
Oh, absolutely. That's why I say it's kind of not evenly distributed. But we also, if you've got, we find that in countries where the obesity rate's growing, we're also finding out that agriculture's got a whole role to play in helping us understand what I call prescription food. Now we have the ability to know and not just give you a blanket answer and say, well, you need to avoid this kind of cholesterol. We now, with instant DNA profiling, can do that for you, Dan, and give you a prescription food pattern that will be for you. And when we do that, we can solve many of the world's problems of obesity and problems of lactose intolerance and others, because we now can do a food profile for you that's for you, not for the general population. It's called prescription food.
Well, you spoke of the importance of technology and the changes that are happening in supporting the young people that are coming into the field. What advice do you have for policymakers and students as they're preparing for their future in agriculture?
Well, for both the students and the policymakers, it's a similar one. For the policymakers, you need to understand that it is a mobile wireless world by sensors and by information flow. Rural America has to have that same kind of access to broadband mobile technology as urban America does. The government of Australia understands that. They've already committed $1.3 billion to build that infrastructure in rural Australia. We've got in pockets in the United States. So for policymakers, it's a mobile wireless world, and we've got to do it. I say we've got to urbanize rural America with that technology. For the young people, it's second nature to them to be connected. And that connection is they don't even think anything about it. They think nothing of sending data to their doctor and not having to go see them as often as you or I would. Well, I need to go see my doctor. Well, if you got that mobile connectivity, they're good at it. And so we got to embrace that young generation that loves it, real good at it, because they're going to be the ones to change it.
Back to those policies, what policies do you think are the most crucial for our future?
The ones that are the most crucial is to give the thing we found out about, I call it the Uber phenomenon, the car location service where you can get a car instead of having to wait on a taxi cab, you can get that. But it's that it comes back to having access to mobile connectivity. Because when you can do that, it lets you market your products as an individual, be a very, what we would call a very small craft market, but if you're connected to the world, all of a sudden, guess what? That small craft cheese that you're producing in rural Minnesota that you may not produce very much of suddenly has a market around the world. And you can ship it around the world, and guess what? On a small acreage and with just a few cows, you can make a craft cheese that'll make you a living.
Dr. Catlett, you talked a little bit about precision ag and planting by the inch and the impact on the carbon footprint. What did you mean?
Well, we do this now in precision agriculture where we can plant by every linear inch the number of seeds that need to go into a field. We also have a new planter, incidentally, that will do up to 3 different hybrids at the same time. So you do that. The point of that is when you do and have that kind of precision agriculture, what you're doing is, from an environment and a carbon standpoint, is this. You're going to get up to 8 times the amount of sequestered carbon out of that intensively managed crop than Mother Nature would do with the basic set of grasses that she planted there. So Mother Nature can sequester carbon only through her oceans, only through her trees and her other plants and in her soils. So we do that precision agriculture. We have got a major impact on reducing carbon in the world, and it comes from agriculture. You have the right profile now of the right microbes in the soil, and we get another 8x because those microbes sequester the carbon as well. If we're going to solve the carbon problem, agriculture has to be at the forefront of it.
What do you think the most exciting thing about agriculture's future is?
I think we have to understand, with all these technologies that are coming on board, that I call it the information, although that's been abused to an extent, but this data or information revolution is greater than, it will be, already is, greater than both the chemical and the mechanical revolution. Because now it's not about just putting a pound of fertilizer on a crop. It's putting amount of fertilizer that is optimum for that section of that number of corn plants that you precisionally applied. And so the information about applying that fertilizer is worth more than the actual cost of the fertilizer. So we get smart systems in place, and the information about that becomes more valuable than the actual corn. So when we do all of that, we're approaching what's been called singularity. We approach a period where information is what drives it, and it's more valuable than the actual product. And we've reached that in many commodities.
Well, thank you so much for sharing with our audience about the future of agriculture.
My pleasure, Dan. Thanks.
Stay tuned for more on Farm Connections.
We've all heard the slogan, if you eat, you're involved in agriculture. The same thing could be said about what you drink. A fast-growing industry in the U.S. are microbreweries. There are more than 3,400 in the U.S. today, and more coming on every month. It takes barley and hops to make beer, and that means more demand for those products.
There's 4 main ingredients. You have water, barley, hops, and yeast that go into beer. So the barley, depending on where you're getting it from, the cost is implied too. The further you have to go to get it, the more expensive it is for transport. But also same thing with hops. You know, there's a big growth and demand for local hops, but that's still pretty young in nature so far in this region. So the bulk of our hops will be coming from the western part of the country, but there's a large initiative locally within our state to start growing hops more.
This locally owned brewery has seen tremendous growth. The reason? People like their beer and the connection to the beer.
People are looking for something that's more local, handcrafted, something that creates variety, and they want to be able to support something that's produced in their backyard. So the idea of having a beer, to sit down and just drinking beer for just the fact it's beer, has changed so much. It's it's evolved over time now that people are expecting. When you stop into a place, they're asking what's local, what can you get that's produced in the area.
The process of making a beer seems simple, but getting a good beer is an art and takes good products.
We go through, look at the specs, our protein levels, our extract. There's a certain percentage that you get from that specific malt too, and kind of base our decisions based on that. And then on top of that, just basic like sensory. So just chewing the malted barley just to see how it tastes in your mouth too. You can kind of get a feel for what it's going to contribute to the beer.
One of the most fun things about being a farm broadcaster is seeing new industries develop in agriculture. We saw it with wineries just a few years ago. They're exploding in growth. Now we're seeing it in the microbrew industry. And the people that are starting these breweries are really excited about the product, and the people that are drinking it really like what they're tasting. This is Lynn Kettleson reporting from Mankato.
Thanks for joining us today. For Farm Connections, I'm Dan Hoffman.